Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of Interview with the Muse. This is a community for artists when curiosity is contraband. The whole purpose of this video podcast is really to build solidarity amongst artists, to alchemize grief and despair into solidarity and world making. And what better time than now to do that work? Just full disclosure, there's a lot going on. When has there not been a lot going on this year? I'm sure each and every one of you, like myself, is going through just a lot of different emotions, as well as lots of different things that you need to tasks you need to complete, work you need to get done. There's a lot of communication going on. There's a lot of like conflict that might be happening. Hopefully, some of that conflict has been generative conflict for you. But full disclosure, I haven't been consistent with this particular video podcast. While at the same time, it's something that's deeply important to me and deeply like generative to me. And so I was feeling a little bit of grief. But then I told myself, you know what? You can sit there and grieve about it, or you can come back to your practice. And I decided to come back to my practice. The last episode I did, if you haven't checked it out, was an actual interview with an actual muse. Okay. It was Roberto and AKA Robert from Trust Your Struggle Collective. And it was an incredible conversation that we had together. And my goal and my dream with this podcast is to be able to expand it and to be able to interview other artists. And so I'm in the process of working on securing funding to do that while juggling work and a bunch of other projects. So all that to say, today what I want to do is actually I want to engage in this one particular writing prompt, and it comes from a poem by Martin Espada called Imagine the Angel of Bread. And for my OGs poets out there, you probably have already, engaged with this piece. It's one of the most amazing poems. But if you haven't, this particular poem is a really helpful poem for processing when there's a lot going on in terms of like uprisings, when a lot of people are organizing for justice, for their communities, for their family members. Right now, I'm based in the Bay Area, but in Southern California and LA, there's uprisings happening against the ICE detention and kidnappings of people in our communities. And so this is a moment where there might be a lot of fear, there might be a lot of anxiety, there might be a lot of feelings of despair. Some people are even afraid to go to school or afraid to go to work, but at the same time, we have to go to work to pay our bills. And so it's a time where it's going to be especially important for us to alchemize, right? Not for us to not feel our feelings, not for us to pretend with toxic positivity as if things aren't happening the way they're happening, but really to process our emotions and to continue to remain curious. And so today's activity is going to involve talking about imagining the angels of bread, and kind of imagining the way everything gets flipped, like the power structures get flipped. Okay. And so I want to share this piece with you. I'm going to read it out loud, and I'm also going to include the written poem in this episode. So again, this is by Martin Espada. It's called Imagine the Angels of Bread. This is a year that squatters evict landlords, gazing like admirals from the rail of the roof deck, or levitating hands in praise of steam in the shower. This is a year that shawled refugees deport judges who stare at the floor and their swollen feet as files are stamped with their destination. This is a year that police revolvers stove hot blister the fingers of raging cops and nightsticks splinter in their palms. This is a year that dark-skinned men lynched a century ago return to sip coffee quietly with the apologizing descendants of their executioners. This is a year that those who swim the border undertow and shiver in boxcars are greeted with trumpets and drums at the first railroad crossing on the other side. This is the year that the hands pulling tomatoes from the vine uproot the deed to the earth that sprouts the vine. The hands canning tomatoes are named in the will that owns the bedlam of the cannery. This is a year that the eyes stinging from the poison that purifies toilets, awaking at last to the sight of a rooster-loud hillside, pilgrimage of immigrant birth. This is a year that cockroaches become extinct, that no doctor finds a roach embedded in the ear of an infant. This is the year that the food stamps of adolescent mothers are auctioned like gold doubloons, and no coin is given to buy machetes for the next bouquet of severed heads in coffee plantation country. If the abolition of slave manacles began as a vision of hands without manacles, then this is the year. If the shutdown of extermination camps began as imagination of a land without barbed wire or the crematorium, then this is the year. If every rebellion begins with the idea that conquerors on horseback are not many-legged gods and they too drown if plunged into the river, then this is a year. So may every humiliated mouth, teeth like desecrated headstones, fill with the angels of bread. Okay, so one of my favorite poems, right? There's so many things that we can break down about this poem, the images, the characters, the stories, like each stanza carries so much, like it's compacted with these like elaborate stories of power turned on its head, right? As Juneteenth approaches, I really think about the part of the piece where Martina Spada talks about reparations, right? I'm thinking about the way that, the very beginning of the piece talks about squatters evict landlords. Um, and that's another way that we're looking at the way that shelter or housing has become a commodity and a lot of people are houseless. And yeah, I just love every piece of this poem. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the poem itself. I want you to read it yourself and think about your favorite lines, your favorite words, or favorite images from the piece. What I want to focus on for this particular podcast is I want to focus on the refrain, "This is the year." So for myself, like I'm a very motivated person. I'm very determined. I tend to be fast paced. I'm an Aries with a Sag rising and a Pisces moon. I know it's a lot. And I tend to be really urgent. I've had to learn how to have a balance between being urgent and also being in a flow, right? With artistic flow. And something that I've noticed, especially when it comes to narrative formation and the way that we approach some of the biggest problems in our society, is that refrains are extremely powerful. Someone once told me, I can't remember who it was, it might have been somebody in marketing. They said that like a refrain or a repetition is the closest that we get to a spell in everyday language. So the way when we're just repeating something over and over again. And it might seem monotonous and you might seem like, okay, well, why are we saying this again and again? But the reality is human beings, when things are repeated or things are in rhyme, they tend to retain that information. It kind of not just as like information that's stored in their mind, but it kind of becomes part embodied in them. And that's what's so powerful about poetry. So when Martina Spada said, "This is the year, this is the year, this is the year," it has this just magical refrain that just pulls us back in. Even though he goes in all these different directions, he's talking about workers that are cleaning toilets. He's talking about immigrants and the power that judges have and flipping that on its head. He's talking about all these different topics, but then he comes back to this is the year, this is the year, this is the year. So what I want to invite you to do as an artist, as an organizer, as a creative person, is I want you to imagine that this is your year. So this is the year that things change for you. And what is a power dynamic that you want to flip on its head? What's something that you really want to change? Right. And I'd say for myself, I'll give an example. One of the challenges that I often deal with, even to this day, even as an adult, is limiting beliefs. Right. And so maybe it's like, this is the year that I truly trust my own judgment, that I lean into my intuition and my gut feelings become my compass for how I move forward. Right. I want you to also think not just about yourself and healing so that you can show up better for your artistic practice and better for the community, but I also want you to think about real like power structures and systems, right? So if you can think about For example, for me, I do a lot of work around like economic justice. And also because I have a background as an educator, I really want a lot of people to have access to education. And one of the biggest problems in our society and why we are where we are today is because there's been such a defunding of education. And so maybe it would be this is the year that um, everyone is able to express themselves through written and reading and writing, right? I would expand on that and make it more beautiful and add in some more images for sure in my free write. But let's say the power dynamic that I want to flip on its head is just huge levels of illiteracy that exist in this country. And illiteracy is linked to mass incarceration. It's linked to all types of societal issues. And so the way that I would flip it on its head would be like, I would say, this is the year that everyone has access to education, and not just any education, but education for liberation. Okay. So I want you to try it on your own. I want you to explore with this prompt and let me know what you come up with in the comments. I also want to remind you that this is a podcast that I definitely can use your support. And support can also look like commenting, sharing this post, and also contributing by asking me questions, because every other episode is going to be answering your actual questions as an artist, as a creative, things that have been on your mind, challenges that you're facing, because that is my ultimate goal, to provide support to artists. So thank you so much for joining this episode. I'm really excited about where this podcast is going and about inviting more guest artists to interview other muses besides just interviewing myself. So thank you so much. And remember, our love for one another is more powerful than all the systems conspiring against us. See you next time.